Alrighty. Thank you for joining us here this afternoon. We realize there's a ton of other options for you, and you're here to learn about sleep and work and all of that fun stuff.
We are delighted to be here. Come on in. You guys, could you be any further? Seriously. Come on, we're a friendly crowd. Come on.
That's all right.
Okay.
Then we have to jump out and all that.
Come on, Taylor, come on. Okay, thank you.
I love it. So we're briefly just going to introduce ourselves so that we can really jump into the topic. My name is Ali Alvarez. I'm the Director of Wellbeing at Stanford, and I'm the past chair of the Wellness Committee. We're really thrilled for the topic today.
I'm Valerie Dobias from the Brigham and Women's Hospital. Super excited to be here. And you're introducing?
Katrin Tyler, UC Davis. I'm the Vice Chair for Geriatric Emergency Medicine and Wellness, and also the Medical Director for Physician Wellbeing.
Can y'all hear me? Oh, yeah, okay. Hey, everybody, I'm Emily Hirsch. I'm the Director for Faculty Wellbeing in the Department of Emergency Medicine at Prisma Health and the University of South Carolina School of Medicine, Greenville.
Good afternoon, I'm Paul Kivala. I'm a professor at University of Alabama at Birmingham and the current Chief Strategic Officer for the department.
Hello, I'm Neha Rocker. I am Associate Professor and Vice Chair for Faculty Development and Academic Affairs at Mayo Clinic.
Hi, I'm Michelle Lal. I'm a Professor and Vice Chair for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Emory.
All right. So some of the parts here will be interactive. So for now, just take a picture of this. You don't have to even click on it. Or if you want, so you can start typing your name if you want that. If you want to be anonymous, perfectly okay. That's going to be for the Pull Everywhere.
Oh, wait, quick. Did everybody get it? Not yet. Oh.
You'll get to see it again, and that's okay.
Oh, okay. So wait, how does this work? Just click this to go forward? Okay. All right. Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. Nice to see all of you guys. I'm glad you're here with us on whatever afternoon this is, Thursday. Like I said, my name is Emily Hirsch, and I'm going to be setting up kind of the introduction for everything we're going to talk about later, but I'm going to do some basics about the circadian rhythm, basically. So, as you all probably know, the circadian rhythm is essentially an internal body clock. It is about 24 hours in length, and it helps our bodies adapt to kind of the normal cycles of day and night. What I did not necessarily know, and what you guys may not know, is that we don't actually just have one body clock. We actually have a multitude of body clocks, and these are all generally synced up with one another. But when we experience jet lag or shift work or various other changes, and we desynchronize one of these, we actually desynchronize all of our body clocks at the same time. So this graph up here just kind of is a depiction of this. Our main body clock is actually in the brain. It's through the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and it is set by light coming in through the retina. But virtually every other organ in our body has its own clock that goes along with it. And some of these are not set by light. Some of these are set by our eating time, by our exercise and activity levels, and by various other things. So when we desynchronize by like working at an unusual time of day, let's say, and then we eat at an unusual time of day, and then we exercise at a different time of day, you can see that pretty quickly all of these body clocks can quickly become desynchronized from one another. This is sort of another way of talking about the same thing. There are multiple biochemical processes that are also synced up throughout the 24-hour day as well. The 4 on the top all trough in the middle of the night. The 4 on the bottom all peak in the middle of the night. So our body temperature, activity levels, cortisol levels, and urine volume all sort of hit a nadir in the middle of the night, and many of our hormonal processes actually peak sort of overnight. So again, when we throw one of these processes off, we literally throw them all off. And that's the reason why there are so many negative health effects that are associated with circadian desynchronization. The next part of this that I want to talk to you about is something called chronotype. And not everyone knows what this is, but basically this is the scientific term for whether you're a morning person or a night person. So if you've heard of a morning lark or a night owl, that's what we're talking about here. This is your body's innate preference for when it wants to be awake and when it wants to be asleep. This is actually genetically modified. So this is not something that you can easily change. It is driven by your circadian rhythm. It does shift as we age. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. But this affects when you want to be sleeping, when you want to be active, when your mind is the most cognitively capable of doing work. So there are a lot of functions that are at play when we think about our chronotype. And therefore, if we adapt our schedule to our chronotype, we'll feel pretty good, right? We'll be working when we want to be working. We'll be thinking when it's natural for us to think. We'll be active when it's natural for us to be active. And we'll be resting at the times we're really supposed to be resting. But if we're working in an asynchronous way to our chronotype, we will feel poorly, right? Because now we're being asked to be cognitively intelligent at a time when our body is not naturally set up for that. So again, if we desynchronize our chronotype, desynchronize our circadian rhythm, this has all been associated with multiple adverse health outcomes. So this is just kind of another way of showing this. These are sort of depictions of morning larks and night owls. And what I really want to say about this is that you know the morning people. They're the ones who get up really early in the day. They exercise early. They do all of their work early. They are done with their workday by like noon, and they can coast the rest of the day. The thing that's important to know about morning larks is that they generally do best with very regular schedules. They don't adapt well to really changing their schedules around. So they do best with kind of roles that generally allow them to have consistent schedules. As opposed to night owls, those people, they tend to go to bed later, they tend to wake up later, they're active later in the day, but they also have a much more flexible kind of way of handling circadian disruption in general. And this will become important as we talk later on. Now, in addition to the circadian drive that we were talking about in your chronotype, there is another important mechanism that mediates sleep, and this is called the homeostatic drive for sleep. And basically, this is mediated by adenosine. So adenosine is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, and over the course of the day, we collect, or I should say build, a level of adenosine within our blood-brain barrier, essentially. And as we hit this critical threshold of adenosine, we will feel a tremendous drive and pressure for sleep. So this is independent of the circadian rhythm signaling at all. As we sleep overnight, we sort of wash out that adenosine, we empty out our fatigue bucket, so to speak, and the next day we wake up refreshed, with an empty fatigue bucket sort of ready to go for the day. But note that if our sleep is truncated overnight for any reason, like you worked a late shift and now you have an early meeting, let's say, the next morning, you don't completely empty out your fatigue bucket. And so you start off fatigued already the next day. And so what do? You generally drink caffeine. Well, caffeine is an adenosine antagonist. It will temporarily block the sensation of you being tired, but it will not empty out that fatigue bucket. So it does not minimize that homeostatic drive for sleep. All right, we're talking in this talk today some about pregnancy and some about aging. So here, a word about aging. Aging is obviously a very normal process. God willing, we will all do it. But note that as we age, we start to have a little bit earlier secretion of melatonin. So melatonin is part of our circadian signaling mechanism, and it secretes after dark, basically, and it's part of what tells our body that it's time to go to sleep. But what starts happening as we age is that melatonin secretion advances. It happens a little bit earlier in the evening, and therefore we feel the need to go to bed earlier than we used to, and we feel the need to wake up a little bit earlier than we used to. And what that means is that as we age, we move closer to having a morning chronotype. We start to wake earlier, go to bed earlier, and have less flexibility in our ability to cycle our circadian rhythm, if that makes any sense. The other thing is, as we age, we start to have more fragmentation in our sleep. We either wake up having hot flashes or having to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, or maybe we have sleep apnea and snore or various other things, but our sleep actually becomes fragmented and we have less slow wave and deep sleep as we age as well. So I kind of want to direct you here to the right-hand graph of the two on this slide. This is a little bit about aging and chronotype. So the way this graph works over here on the right is on the x-axis, you have age starting at age 20 going up to 80 plus. On the y-axis, you have chronotype, and the way they often define this is the midpoint of your sleep. So if you go to bed at midnight and wake up at 8, your midpoint is 4 a.m., if that makes any sense. The blue on the graph are males, the pink on the graph are females, and the way this works is that when you're in your 20s, you have a pretty late midpoint of sleep, usually about 4 to 5 o'clock in the morning. And as we age, there's a pretty rapid shifting earlier of that midpoint of sleep. So our chronotype definitely moves earlier as we age. As far as pregnancy, there's not a whole lot of effective pregnancy on circadian rhythm, despite my trying to look this up. I saw this one study here that I present to you that followed women from pre-pregnancy all the way through to the end of pregnancy and birth, and they did have a very slight shifting earlier in chronotype, early in pregnancy, but by their 3rd trimester, they had normalized. That being said, 3rd trimester is disruptive to sleep for a variety of reasons, but the big thing to note here is that while pregnancy doesn't have an effect on our chronobiology has a big effect on pregnancy. So remember, we talked early on about the fact that we have multiple body clocks all going on at the same time, and when we desynchronize one, we desynchronize them all. So when you're talking about a 3rd trimester pregnant woman, let's say, who is working at an unusual time of day, not only is her brain clock at one time, but her uterine clock might be at another, her hormonal clocks might be at a 3rd and a 4th and a 5th, and because of this desynchronization, this is the reason why in pregnancy we start seeing higher rates of miscarriage, preterm labor, preterm birth, low birth weight, and various other adverse pregnancy and birth effects as a result of circadian disruption. So I think that's it. I'm going to hand things off now to Dr. Tyler to talk to us about night shifts.
Thank you. All right, thanks everybody, so great to be here. I'm going to talk just very briefly about sort of some of the consequences of shift work in general and night shift in particular, and I'm sure you don't have to, we're not going to read through this whole list here. I'm sure many of you have experienced many of these issues. There is occupational sleep loss, which can impair our ability to do our job. There are factors associated with burnout by virtue of our shift work. And there are both short and long-term health conditions that are contributed to by the shift work experience. This is another study looking at chronotype, and actually I was very surprised to find that there's actually a large body of literature around chronotype, shift work, chronobiology. There's just not very much in the healthcare literature about it, and we can all speculate as to why that might be. But again, this just to reinforce what Dr. Hirsch was saying, you know, the chronotype really exists around a more or less natural, normal distribution, with some people having a very early chronotype and some people having a much later chronotype. And you may have noticed, especially the people with grey hair in the room, that yours has changed over the course of several years, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Just in terms of whether or not we're speaking the same language in terms of what shift is what, within the chronobiology literature and the industrial sort of literature, actually what each individual shift is pretty well defined. What's not well defined is in the healthcare literature which shift counts for what, and that's particularly true when you're comparing between departments. But for the definitions, a day shift is something that goes between 8 p.m. and 4 p.m. that includes at least half of your working time. An evening shift is between 4 p.m. and midnight, at least half of your working time, and a night shift is between midnight and 8 a.m., at least half of your working time fits in those hours. And then we also talk about compressed work weeks, which is where you do that standard 40-hour week, but you're doing it in a shorter period of time, usually, in 3 days. And that's what we see typically from our nursing colleagues, who are often doing 12-plus hour shifts. This study came from a friend of mine who also talks on this issue, and it was part of a flyer from the Federal Aviation Authority, and you can see it's a crew member who has a night shift at the start of day 3 there. So day one is a normal day, and you can see the window of circadian low, which is advertised by the Snickers commercials, you know, when you get hangry. It's also what we're all experiencing at the moment. I'm like, why didn't I get a coffee before I came up here? So then you can see that that person has a normal sleep. They get up the next day, they have a nap before their night duty, and then you can see that their percent effectiveness as measured by formal psychomotor testing is dramatically reduced. And it takes several days for them to get back up. We know that poor sleep quality is progressively and linearly associated with all 3 burnout subscales. This is from Singapore, about 5,000 people. So here we have a poll, which is to ask what your experience is.
And Gary, I'm going to need you to switch us to the poll everywhere, please. In true emergency medicine fashion, we're trying to fly the plane, get distracted with the doors and all of that stuff, and see if this works. So if it works the first time, we're going to continue. If not, we're just going to move on. Looks like 2 people have filled out something. I know there's like an activation at the very beginning.
8 surveys underway.
Yeah, that means there's, yeah.
Yep.
All right, I'm assuming, oop, there goes some, thank you. So people are typing stuff. I appreciate that. I love it. The snow program, and the old people don't have to work nights. Probably we're going to change that name by the end of this talk. There's one thing that we can make actionable here. We're going to change that. All right, thank you so much for participating. Gary, can you switch us back to the next shift? Next slides, please. Thank you. Again, we're just going to briefly cover some language here. Some of you may be calling it sick call. Some of you may be calling it backup call. Some of you may be calling it jeopardy call. At our shop, what we started calling it is backup call because, especially at the early phase of the pandemic, we realized that it's not just somebody who's getting sick, right? I think gone are the days when we would show up to work when we're like hacking and vomiting and seeing our own patients. But also there's other reasons why we needed to activate. Maybe it's because our kids lost their childcare, or maybe because our parents that we're taking care of also needed somebody to be there with them to go to their appointments. And so we've expanded in our department the utilization of these activations call, which is good in one way, but operationally that meant that in the past year alone we had over 3 times the number of activations, which meant that every single day we would get emails about like, hey, there's a hole in this schedule, and that was also did not feel good. And so we needed to just address that, not to get rid of the idea of like sick call, and also there's this concept of if you call it sick call, then we're emergency physicians. We don't get sick. And it kind of stigmatizes this idea that we need a break. And so for us, by just simply calling it a backup call, it expanded it for us. So now we're going to go back to the poll. Gary. Do you have a backup or sick call program? I like it. Several people here in the room have a backup call system already. Some of you do not. Something hopefully that you'll learn from our talk that it'll be helpful. Thank you. Can you switch us back, please? Thank you. And now we're going to go over another group of populations, the pregnancy and growing family.
Thanks. Okay. So actually what happened is that this was supposed to be 2 separate didactics, and we were asked to merge them. So I'm going to summarize an hour-long didactic into 5 minutes. I hope you're ready. The good thing is, I don't know how to use this. That's the bad thing. Okay, the big green button, got it. The good thing is, after we submitted the didactic, our paper, which we were going to talk about, actually got published. It just got published. So this will have in great detail everything I'm talking about. But so I wanted to just break down the paper in 4.5 minutes. So there is current dissatisfaction with the current state of maternity leave, paternity leave, parental leave, and there's significant variation across the country. So what we did is we created these consensus-driven recommendations. So the way we did that was a 3-step process. First, we took all the literature we could find in any industry and in any language that could be converted to English, and we scanned what they do for all of these leave policies and all variations of that. And then with that, we created some recommendations. Step 2, we had the 11 societies in emergency medicine in America submit a couple of stakeholders. The stakeholders went through 3 rounds of voting. And what that means is after round 1, they were able to edit our recommendations, and then in round 2 and 3, they voted, and we saw what achieved consensus. And then step 3 was we opened it up to the public for commentary. And so people could comment, this is fair, this is not fair, this is good, this is not good, here's how I would change it. And so we had 4 categories that achieved consensus, and they were miscarriage. So this is what miscarriage, it's specifically related to night shifts during the first trimester. We found literature that showed that they are at increased risk, as you heard, for miscarriage in uncomplicated pregnancies and hypertensive disorders of pregnancy. So the recommendations are as follows, and you will see this in great detail in the paper, if you're interested. The second category was prepartum and peripartum context. So this is the context, like the definitions. But here are the more interesting recommendations of what was recommended, what achieved consensus. So national consensus of what we should be doing in these periods. I'm not going to read them to you, but I'm hoping you all scan the paper. I'll leave it up for just a second. Then the next one was parental leave. This does not mean maternity leave only. It's paternity leave, it's if you adopt somebody, it's if you have a surrogate, it's all kinds of leave if you're expanding your family. And we know that leave in general, we're light years behind every other country. We've heard this 100 times. So these were the recommendations. And we go really in depth, Dr. Lal and Dr. Dobias and I went really in depth into explaining what these recommendations are and the evidence behind them. And then finally, the one that achieved consensus was the topic of lactation. This is one I think that many hospitals have, right? We have some sort of protections around lactation. And so here were the recommendations. The categories that did not achieve consensus were fertility treatment, secondary parental leave, scheduling return to work, and childcare. But that just means it didn't achieve consensus on a national scale. It does not mean that at an individual institution you can't look at them and decide what you want to adopt. And so, of course, there are barriers to implementation, and these were, we discussed these at every round of voting and then with public commentary. The early disclosure of family planning and pregnancy could be a barrier. Manipulation of published studies, not schedules, and accommodations for one person means accommodations for everyone, and that can get expensive. So we understand and we address these. And so these were the 4 topics that did not achieve consensus, but like I said, we should be talking about these at our individual institutions. So again, a poll here. Thank you.
Gary?
So while everyone does the poll, just to be clear, the 4 areas that did not reach national consensus, there is good literature to support why they should have. And as you can imagine, the areas that already have some federal or state standards behind them were easier to achieve consensus with. So I think when you're thinking about your family leave policies 2.0, how do we take the biases that come out when you talk about generally maternity leave versus paternity leave, right? It has to be parental leave, and it doesn't matter, as Dr. Raukar said, how you become a parent, it's that you are a parent. But I encourage you to take a look, like in my opinion, that's actually the most interesting part of the paper, is the areas that we didn't achieve consensus, and what do we need to do to continue studying in those areas to consider it. So I encourage you to take a look at that piece because, as we've already talked about our circadian clocks and how they can become disrupted, they are really disrupted when you have a child that doesn't sleep during the night in your home, right? And so there's really some good evidence as to why we should be thinking about this from a patient safety perspective, and our, our cognitive burden and burnout, so.
Thank you. As you can see, there's a lot of things already that we're trying to change here, or at least hoping that you can bring back to your institution and change, including maybe just like reimbursing backup call activation, maybe even like making sure that you have a lactation room in the emergency department. These are just simple things that for me, for instance, I never really understood this until having read this or like working with colleagues and realizing that like, if we don't provide these safe spaces for them to even just have a lactation room, then it really just adds to this inequity in our own practice. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about parental leave. And so with that, Gary, can you switch us back?
All right, we're actually switching to age now, which is, as you can see from the gray hairs on my head, is something near and dear to me.
What about no hair?
Also no hair. Okay, so same slide as before. Just a reminder that there is a normal distribution of what our chronotype looks like. And then as we get older, our chronotype tends to get earlier. So I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I imagine that there are people in this room, certainly me, who started off as a very late chronotype. I was a swing shift, night shift queen. I loved those things. And then like my mid-40s, early 50s, and all of a sudden they were very, very difficult to recover from. And when I saw this kind of literature, I'm like, it's not just me. This is actually what happens physiologically across a population. So again, same slide as before. What you can't see that well is there's a huge amount of variation within individuals. So some people stay late, start late and stay late, and some people start late and go early, and some people, it's uncommon to start early and go late, but you may not change that much. And with my N of two emergency physicians in my household, I went very early and one of us did not.
Well, I'm not an attorney. I'm not an HR expert, but I am the myth buster. And as ASAP president, a lot of things came to us, and certainly in every group I've always worked with, there's always the question is, do you give accommodations? And as the group gets older, if everybody over 50 doesn't have to do night shift and everybody's over 50, you're going to have a rough time. But what I really want to do, there is an urban myth out there right now that it's age discrimination if you give somebody over age 40 or over age 50 some type of accommodation. And it probably is. The problem is the law only protects people over age 40, and there's really no protection for people under age 40. There are some protections that you can't basically take them into servitude. So there's nanny laws that protect, working 100 hours, 200 hours a week, basically. But there's really not a lot of other protections. So I think the big issue is to dispel that rumor, because it seems to be persistent even to this day. But there are ways of creating caveats for different things. Work more weekends, work more swing shifts, less day shifts for the older workers, to eliminate that night shifts. Because I have to say, I was the same way as Katrin. Night shift, piece of cake, but it definitely takes its hold. The other issue here, is the legalese. This is the Age Discrimination Employment Act. This is the link. I think you guys can all get this, but this is really the thing if this is at your workplace. And you can read the laws. It basically encumbers it. This is straight from the Department of Labor that reinforces these laws.
Okay, so one industry that has looked at this a fair bit, that's not healthcare, is aviation. And, there's a lot of ways we are not like pilots, but in some ways we are. We make a lot of decisions on our shift. This study is looking at hypnograms, which is a sleep study, for pilots flying from the west coast of the United States to the east coast of the main body of Asia. That's about a 15-hour flight. The top graph is a younger pilot. The bottom graph is an older pilot. The older pilots don't go to sleep quickly. They wake up more often. They wake up 10 times per hour compared to 4 times per hour for younger pilots. So this is a physiologic event in people who are long and well trained for this process. It still happens to you, right? It's just physiology. Things that we don't have answers for, but I want you to think about. You know, there is the healthy shift worker. Some people are able to tolerate the shift work well into their 60s and 70s. Some people cannot. What are the risks of having older physicians? What are the benefits of having older physicians? What are the risks and benefits associated with shift work? What does your medical leave processes look like, and is it fair and equitable? And do you have flexible work options with retirement, reappointment, part-time work, and so forth? So I think we'll just go straight to the poll. You might have already... LA, I think we...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
All right, Gary, please. So does your emergency department support aging physicians with an option for modified schedules?
Wow.
That's pretty, I want to know from the 92% of you how you did that, because our institution was that institution that we initially had it, and then for equity and making sure that everybody got fair number of shifts, we took it out and then realized like there's some unintended consequences, including people who are aging, now having to work overnights, including my chair who would work like overnight shifts, and she would not be as effective the next day because she'll have to recover. And so when we tried to bring it back, we then had to go through a lot more legal issues, including what was just brought up, that perhaps this was discrimination. So if you have it, don't change it again for now, because you might have a hard time actually putting it in place officially. Can you bring us back to the slides, please?
Actually, that's the end of our formal presentation. Thank you all so much for being here. We would like to open it up for conversations. You can go back into the thing and add additional comments if you would like. We're happy to answer any questions.
We actually have some standardized questions that we prepared, but also I will be running around so that I can give you the microphone to ask the questions. In the meantime, maybe I'll just propose this question for the group, like how have you navigated working with schedules specific to, number one, pregnancy, and then number two, new parents in your department?
I love that.
And then I'll take one of these so I can run.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Oh, okay, great. So the question in your specific departments, if you would answer those questions about pregnancy.
well, I can go first. We, at the moment, we actually adapted our night shift policy at the same time as we adapted our pregnancy policy, which I think helped everybody understand the whole cycle of life. Is this on?
We can hear you.
Yep. So we don't have any formal policies yet for new parents beyond the standard parental leave process, but actually one of the first people in the last 12 months to use the deliberate parental leave policy with the no night shifts, and UC Davis, I have to say, is extremely generous. At a university level, people get 3 months of leave for the gestational parent or for the primary parent, and then additional time for baby bonding. But we do have a telemedicine service, and so that person has actually chosen to come back and only do telehealth for the first month back at work, which I think, offers a lot more schedule control, and it's a lot less exhausting.
I like that a lot because they can then also work from home if that's possible for the telemedicine part.
Yeah, so we're in the process of finalizing our new policy. We were pretty fortunate that a couple years ago, the university put out a policy for 6 weeks paid parental leave for both parents. So now, in addition to your salary continuation, which is Emory's version of short-term disability, as a birthing parent, you can potentially take your 12 weeks plus 6. And the 6 weeks can be divided in different times. So we've had a lot of parents split that to a little later in the year, maybe when the other parent's going back to work or their leave time is up. But we do no nights in the first and third trimester. There is scheduling administrators who assist in finding coverage for those shifts. So we don't put the burden primarily on the person who needs the assistance. But I think the part of this policy I'm most excited about is that when you return to work, in those 3 months, you have no nights and no call. So for those of you that are in a system where you take call, you potentially have to schedule 36 hours of childcare to maybe not have to go to work, depending on if you're a single parent or what your partner does. So that's one, an incredible financial burden, but two, like really stressful. So I think, and that's for both parents. So I think that for me is the most exciting piece that's coming into play and really allowing people to adjust.
Any questions? I'm going to be walking around.
I just,
So, sorry, I was part of a Democratic group where we had pretty good policies and we sort of kept an eye out for each other. But now that we're sort of under the rubric of the hospital with a big expansion of different providers in different stages of their careers, how do you guys sort of set the stage? Because what people remember is the last time they got called in, the last time they had to do an extra shift, to sort of make sure everybody's sort of happy, or at least not angry, or people are feeling that they're having to do more, which they're not, but people only remember the last bad thing that happened to them.
You're talking about backup system being called in, navigating
Or when we have 7 providers go out on maternity leave simultaneously and we all get extra shifts, which, works out fine, but people remember the last bad thing that happened to them.
and work, yes.
Disproportionately.
And I would say for our public commentary and different, practices from community to academic, that was a big issue for some single covered, more community, more rural, that they have single coverage when they're out, how to cover for that, and they have a smaller group, and accommodating that was very challenging financially and with the staff because they felt very burdened. I know that was part of our public commentary. And I would just say anecdotally, when I had my children, which was a while ago, my boss at the time said after my second child, "You're done, right?" Ha ha, like joking, but not. And I'm like, whoa. Anyway, it is, and it felt like, and that maternity leave is, let me put it out there, is not a vacation. It's not a vacation, and a lot of people assume that you're resting, it's restful, you're cradling your baby, and it is not. That's what I would say.
I mean, I think, though, this is where having a really mindful scheduler comes into play, right? And I actually see one of my former Detroit colleagues in the back, but Bob used to do our schedule. Your schedule was legit amazing. I'm just gonna say that.
Woo-hoo!
I never, for real. I mean, like really, when I worked for Wayne State, you never had an off request denied. And we had physician schedulers, and they were all super dedicated. And if there was gonna be an issue, they were so proactive in saying, this is gonna be an issue. And I felt like you always did a phenomenal job of making it up to people, like on the back end or somewhere else, or ensuring like if you'd been activated every single time you've been on call for the last 3 months, that somehow they would find a way to make your schedule better the next time it was published. And I think what's gotten challenging is many groups use scheduling software, which sort of takes that personal piece out of the schedule. And I get it, it's expensive to pay for a physician to do the schedule, But since we're the ones that work the schedule, I truly believe we're the only ones who really get it and understand what that means when it was like, hey, I know you were supposed to be off this weekend, but we have an emergency. Can you cover? We'll make it up to you. And that goes so far. So I'm sure you're still doing an amazing schedule, Bob. Much appreciated. I know you are. I know you are. It's a labor of love. But really, it was truly appreciated. And I think that's something that we can take back to our departments to say, how do we put this human touch back on it so that we don't have one single person who's really feeling burdened?
And then to answer your question, I think that if you're very transparent about it, right? So like if you show the data, historically, it all works out in the end, it all shakes out in the end, that it's not unfair, and if you have a fair scheduler, you'll get those shifts returned to you. It all does work out. One thing I want to comment is with these pregnancy policies and parental policies, they all should be optional, right? You can't just mandate to a new mom, 'cause that may not work for her. You must take these 12 weeks off. You have to make it optional, and that way they can do what works best for them. And same with night shifts. After 50, your group doesn't do nights, but you want to do nights, you should be allowed to do that.
I just want to say we have an interesting part of our sort of pregnancy, I guess I would say, policy that I haven't heard mentioned yet, so I'll just talk about it. And that is that we have an extra call person that we call baby call, actually, that starts during the final month of a gestating person's pregnancy. And this is an additional call person that's on for 24 hours at a time on call. But the idea is if that pregnant person goes out on bed rest for some reason for several weeks, we are not burning our call person every single day. We have a special call person who's there purely to take baby call, and that way we preserve the rest of our backup call for all of our other typical backup call needs. It's worked very effectively for our incredibly fertile group of emergency physicians.
I'm going to bite on this as the guy, which I'm sure I'm going to step into this. I'm at UAB right now, and it's fantastic. I mean, we have a lot of young physicians, and we have a lot of staff to be able to cover that. I did come from a single hospital group in California where we had 9 partners, and there were challenges because of the structure. We weren't employees, we were partners, and you know, there was definite challenges. So I think we need to come up with other solutions for those people as well. You know, we helped our program. We didn't, quote, offer health insurance, but we gave it. And we also signed up all of our young parents with short-term disability policies. And so they were covered for that period of time, almost whole, actually, a lot of them, depending on how long they took. But that's just another option here, because remember, we're all talking here as W-2 employees. If you're a 1099 or a partner, those rules, or a small group, those rules don't apply.
I will just add as well that I think these are very uncomfortable conversations that just needs to happen. And so for our department, what I did was we had a faculty forum and talked about it specifically, including, because again, we've expanded the whole idea of a backup system. And so what was very helpful then was also people sharing, like, when my partner's mom died, it was really helpful that somebody covered my shifts. I just texted my medical director, and automatically, don't worry about your shifts, we'll take care of it. And so the more narratives like this that came up, the more as a group, we really embrace the idea that this is the culture that we want. Emergency medicine, we're very replaceable, right? Like somebody will cover my shift the next day. But for us, this was a great reminder that we are more than replaceable when there's this community that truly understand that even if there's 7 of us that's gonna use up the new parent initiative, that is okay. Because we also have like every 6 months, we have a vacation opt-in program so that you can plan ahead of time. Like I go every August, I'm gonna be gone for 2 weeks. And I don't have any kids, but at least the department knows that like every August, I'm going to be one of those people that will take those vacations. You're next, and then I'm going to...
And as you bring it over, just real quick about the assumptions that departments make. It happened in ours that they paternalistically thought it was good and made it mandated that no night shifts, and a lot of our women liked night shifts. They had children, it worked well for them, and they made an assumption that they were doing a good thing without the dialogue, without the conversation, and they had to retroactively understand that they wanted to opt in. And so dialogue, conversations about this is very important, and not assumptions about what a parent will want. Sorry, you were going to make a, oh, right here. Yes, yes, yes.
I'm a future APP, and I was just wondering, do APPs at your institutions have the same protections as the physician group? I know that there are different schedulers and different on-call systems, but I was just curious.
No, they.
Yes, at our group.
Yeah, no, in ours, they're hospital employees.
No, in ours, they're hospital employees.
Yeah, same in ours, and it's a union issue, and so there's a completely different salary structure for the APP model.
But science is science, so this paper would be applicable to APPs as well.
At UAB, my understanding is it's the same.
So I'm very curious to hear more about this first and last trimester arrangement. Is that something that is unique to your institution, or have other institutions adopted that? And another question is, what we're talking about is faculty. How do the residents, who often are of an age to start families, how do they feel when they hear the faculty are getting maybe slightly more benefits than they are? Has that been an issue for you with regards to this first and last trimester issue?
So the first trimester piece is new. The third trimester piece has been there a long time. There's been literature for decades to support that particularly overnight shifts in the third trimester lead to early and preterm labor, as well as hypertension and potentially preeclampsia, eclampsia. So I think when you look nationally, that seems to be relatively common. The first trimester literature, though, is much newer, and I think the greatest barrier there is that, if you've had a first trimester loss, is the first person you really want to go to your boss? To be like, hey, I'm only 5 weeks pregnant, but I know we already have this schedule out. It's a very uncomfortable conversation, right? When you potentially haven't told family that you're pregnant, but you're trying to do what might be best for your body. So I personally have not needed to use that, but we have a faculty member who we just used it, and she got pulled off all her nights, and other people got plugged in, and it didn't, as far as I can tell, it didn't seem to ruffle too many feathers. I have faculty in this room that probably don't even know who I'm talking about, so it seems to have been okay. I think in terms of the residents, we have really crafty program leadership, and I think they have been able to do a phenomenal job of protecting the residents. And frankly, before the university came down with their parental leave policy, particularly if you were a dad, the leave was much better for our residents than it was for our faculty. So.
UC Davis, I think we've had 10 deliveries in the resident classes in the last maybe 15 months. So it's and agree with everything Michelle said about the first trimester challenges. I personally had to go to our vice chair when I was 8 weeks pregnant, and it was an uncomfortable conversation. We have a slightly different approach in the late trimester than what Emily is talking about. Our department decided that we would take people off the ED clinical schedule from 36 weeks. And we do have the telehealth medicine option, so that because we had a number of people who had to call out and use that baby leave, and so our department decided something different. So we take people off the ED schedule from 36 weeks, but they can still do clinical work, so they don't need to use their vacation time. And that seems to have gone down pretty well.
There's a paper, Birthing the New Parents Initiative, and that's co-written by faculty and residents, and that's what we use at Stanford. Dr. Wolf.
Hey.
Actually, can I just add one more thing? What we do at UAB is people can petition for accommodation. And the other thing that we have found is you have to have complete confidentiality, immediately pull their names off the shift so nobody kind of knows what's going on. And whether that's these issues or sickness or FMLA, it's over the top. I mean, if you want to self-disclose, that's it. But that is problematically both an issue and also there's legal issues with it as well.
That's a very good point.
First of all, thank you. Such hugely important information. The First, two questions. First one, are you guys aware of any policies by ASAP or SAEM or any of the EM organizations about the importance of having a physician scheduler? Because I don't know about you guys, the schedule is one of those things that nobody notices until it's bad. And if you don't have a physician scheduler, many times, example, we had a physician scheduler, he retired, save a lot of money, don't give those reduced hours, give it to somebody else. We've gone through 4 different iterations because I work at a big academic department. There's a lot of things that go into that schedule. And past schedule, we didn't decide, the schedule decided people get 2 weekends off a month. They started adding Friday as not part of the weekend. So if you requested Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that counted for 3 days, and you could get 1 more weekend day off a month. Something that sounded like made sense if you were a non-physician. If you're the physician, the first thing you can do to piss off your entire group is to get the schedule out late, have to change the schedule, and do things that really impact their life. So that's question number 1.
Not aware.
The answer is no.
I know ASAP, there is a policy on a fair and equitable schedule, but not about a physician scheduler. In fact, there is a couple companies that I know that will off-source this for the exact reason you have. So there are professional scheduling companies that somehow have some type of formula. Also, I think QGenda and Byte, I can't remember the other one, they actually have those algorithms that will give people 2 weekends off in addition to shift progression. But, you know, some of those things, it becomes some pretty very complicated calculus.
Yeah, but that just highlights, I think, that this is very important. And for us, same in our department, like, there's a lot of initiatives, but we cannot just change schedules because it's the one thing that, if you're right, if we change something, it'll piss people off, and we can't afford that.
And the second question, and we can talk offline if you answered this before I walked in, we were one of those departments that said after the age of 60, no more overnights. However, our HR department said that can be looked at as discriminatory. So it's now after X amount of years you get no overnights. The problem is we have hired a bunch of mid-faculty people who will definitely hit 60 way before they're in that 25 year. And I'm wondering, what are your suggestions for departments to handle this?
We did talk about it, and it is a myth. There's no protection for people under age 40. It's only for protection for people over. The link's in there to the Department of Labor link. It's an urban myth that there's age discrimination against older employees.
Thank you.
I think it just means that we need to incentivize more the nocturnist team. So in our shop, we have a waiting list to be a nocturnist because there's a lot more benefits for us to work overnights.
We had that at Brown too. We had a wait list for nocturnists because they got such sweet deals.
And
We have, like,
that's
monthly meetings or like maybe quarterly meetings for the nocturnists only about like the operational issues that we deal with. And so there's a lot more closer voice to the clinic.
And that's what we've done at the Brigham is incentivize the nocturnists. They get either it's clinical hours, which is, you know, more they get credits than those that don't. And so it's not, they initially had age at 55 and over, no nights. And then they switched to an overall policy. You could opt out of nights completely, but you had to work more clinically proportionately so that you incentivize the Nighthawks. And a previous institution also to incentivize by money or financial or hours works well, especially the younger people don't want to work as much. Or with families, sometimes that works very well, getting the kids off, et cetera.
I just want to say, I think I heard it mentioned earlier today that perhaps we have experienced physicians not working nights, but perhaps they work more evenings. And I just want to say, as someone who had a group of dedicated eveningists in our group, that did not work well in the sense that you then had people who weren't the eveningists who now were either working days or nights. And days and nights. And it caused a lot more chaos kind of for everyone once you had this kind of dedicated group of evening people. So the problem with our schedule is that there are no it is at some level a zero-sum game, and every time you make a change to accommodate one group or one physician, there will always be some sort of unintended consequences that will happen for the rest of the group. So you just have to be really careful in how you think about how to design perhaps a night shift opt-out policy to make sure that in the process of giving them a real benefit that's important and needed, that you're not somehow inadvertently punishing everyone else in the process. And so it just takes, like LA was saying earlier, some nuanced conversations, some uncomfortable conversations, and a willingness to kind of play in the sandbox together about what our values are and what we're willing to do in order to be fair to everyone in the group.
And with that, thank you so much. We will continue the conversation outside if you have more questions, but really, truly, thank you.
Yay, to our panelists. Yay.